Hi, everyone. I'm Angela Yip with City Administrator Carmen Chu's office. Carmen should be joining in just a couple of minutes, so we do have a little bit of time.
Okay.
Yeah, if you wanted to continue conversations or if you had any questions for me, but Carmen should be here any minute.
Okay, well, let me ask you a question. City Administrator Chu seems to be in charge of a lot of things. Does she have a lot of people that like you to help her out?
That's a great question. Yeah, so City Administrator's office is one of the biggest departments in the city. We've got close to 2,000 employees. And yeah, Carmen, I'm sure will give the full overview, but we do everything from, animal care and control to the medical examiner's office to 311. So it really, really spans the gamut. Yes, there's no shortage of things to be working on.
Okay. Where are your offices located? City Hall?
Yeah, so city administrator's office, because we have so many different divisions and agencies that are under Carmen's department, we are pretty spread out of different city buildings across the city, but we do have offices in City Hall. So we are on the third floor of City Hall, and yeah, welcome folks to stop by anytime.
Okay, great. So you talk about her department. Well, isn't she more or less of an administrator of many departments? Or do I have that wrong?
Well, no. So the city administrator's office is made up of about 26 different departments and divisions, different agencies of the city. And so, there is a defined set of departments, or we call them divisions, that run up under the city administrator's office. But that being said, Carmen in our office does work on many different interagency efforts that are citywide. And so, while she has a set number of kind of agencies under her purview, we are always working with other city departments as well, very closely.
I had a quick question, if that's okay. I was just curious. We understand that it takes 18 months to hire somebody in the city. Is it possible that some of the people that are in the city administrator's office underneath her purview could be hired faster, or do you need more people working for the department, the HR department? Is HR under your, one of the departments?
It's a really great question, and sorry, I can't see your name right now, but on the Zoom, but yeah, so the Department of Human Resources is a separate department, not under the city administrator's office, but certainly, hiring and the speed at which hiring happens at the city is a big frustration across departments. Again, I don't want to steal too much of the city administrator's thunder, but one of the initiatives that she is really leading with the Department of Human Resources and the Controller's Office. So again, talking about those interagency initiatives that impact city operations citywide, leading an initiative that we call Government Operations Recovery. And it really is, in response to some of these challenges and pain points that were exacerbated during the pandemic when so many city workers switched to, emergency response full time, and kind of what were the challenges that we really saw during the pandemic trying to, meet the need. And so part of that initiative, that Government Operations Recovery Initiative, is working on making city hiring faster because, across the city, I don't think there's anyone who would tell you that they were super pleased with the speed at which hiring takes. But that piece of it really is being led by the Department of Human Resources.
Right. Speaking of hiring, how long have you been with Carmen?
Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't see who that came from. And I believe Carmen just joined, so I'll pass it off to her. But I have been with her office now for about 2 years, and that's been just a joy. So it's a pleasure to connect with you all folks.
And she's been the administrator for how long? 6 years?
She's been city administrator for over 2 years now. So she was
2 years.
serving in the assessor recorder's office and was appointed by the mayor in beginning of 2021.
Okay, great, thank you. Lee,
So just because it's unusual, I thought usually what citizens do is, things that are wrong and that need to be fixed. I thought I would just take the for a compliment because during the pandemic, calling, I forget which department it is, because suddenly there were lots of mosquitoes. And it seemed to be problems with treating the water in the sewers and so forth. And so rather to my surprise, this year I discovered no mosquitoes. So evidently your office or somebody has got it sorted out. So thank you.
great, I'm glad the mosquitoes have flown away. Okay, are we ready to go to Carmen now, or do we have time for a couple more questions? Angela?
Yeah, I see City Administrator Chu is here. So yes.
Okay, let's go right to her then. So, Administrator Chu, welcome. Glad to have you here with us. If you'd like to say a few words about your job and how long you've been doing it and what a wonderful job you've been doing, we will then go on to selected questions and then to Q&A from the audience. Again, welcome.
Sure.
See you again.
Well, good to see you. First off, I want to say thank you, Charles, for helping to facilitate this meeting and to help get some of the thoughts that people have early to our organization. And I know there's a lot of folks. I see Shauna and a lot of folks that I know.
Hi, Carmen.
Hi, from the
My
community.
my tree, by the way, is really growing.
Oh, good. The one you picked up?
Yeah.
Awesome. And it's just good to see everybody here. I wanted to perhaps just share with you a bit of the work that I do and what's under the responsibility of the city administrator, because I think a lot of people talk about the office of the city administrator, but may not know some of the functions that are within us and also some of the functions that are actually that reside outside of our jurisdiction as well. But it would just be good to just make sure that folks have a good grounding in it. So I think as Angela May has mentioned to you, I became city administrator February of 2021. So it's been about 2 years, a little more than 2 years now that I've been in the job. And I entered into the organization at a time of tumult, obviously, with some of the challenges on corruptions and other issues, and the prior city administrator leaving the role. Resigning from the organization. I also joined the organization in the middle of when city operations were still very much in a remote setting, even for many of the office work that was happening. And so over the course of the last 2 years, we've seen a pretty big transition in terms of the workforce coming back or coming back for a portion of their time. And that's been a departure from compared to the first, several months, half a year that I was in the organization. And so just so you know, in our organization, we have about 1,500 or so employees who are part of the city administrator team. Everybody from janitors and stationary engineers to analysts to financial individuals to people who do contracting and purchasing to 311 call operators. The organization, I think in the creation of the city administrator's office is one of a long history where I think originally it was made up a lot of small organizations and a lot of small departments that shared, frankly, in the back end administrative functions of an organization. So they would share in joint HR services, they'd share in accounting services, and so on. And I think over time, there's been a lot of different small creations or organizations that have been put into the city administrator's office because they could share in that administrative function, but also because there was no other home for it, frankly, in the city. So you see in our organization right now, about 24, 25 different organizations, programs, divisions, some are technical departments, and they don't always have a common theme. They all have very, very different goals and work that they do. So everything from back-end services, core functions of the city government, as I mentioned, like contracting, like capital planning, technology planning, digital services, technology, real estate, contract monitoring, those kinds of functions are in the organization. But there are also a lot of outward facing parts of our organization as well, including the county clerk, 311, Animal Care and Control, the Office of Civic Engagement and Immigrant Affairs. We also have the Moscone Convention Center that is under our fold, Treasure Island, that development project, the Grants for the Arts, Community Challenge Grants, local business programs, and Permit Center. These are all kind of different functions that sit within the city administrator's office. And so, as you know, there's a lot of backbone core city functions that our organization is responsible for, but there's also a lot of outward facing services that we're responsible for as well. What you'll notice when I mention all of those organizations is that we typically don't have a lot of public safety functions in our organization. So the police department, fire department, the sheriff, those entities are not within the city administrator's kind of umbrella. Public health, human services agency, the homeless department, DCYF, children, youth, and their family, city planning, DBI, those are not departments that are under the city administrator's function. And so it's just good to kind of orient your perspective on some of those things. In our world, aside from those organizations that we have, we often are charged with, I think, carrying out some of the citywide issues that might be cross-departmental. So for example, as a city was contemplating how we were going to return to the office during a COVID environment, or what kinds of city services to open up, at what time, which items would be in person, how public meetings would operate. Our organization often had a hand at helping to plan and coordinate input before developing citywide policy on some of those issues. And so even though that's not necessarily something that's within our jurisdiction per se as one of the divisions or departments, it just is a cross-departmental function that has no other home but to sit in the city administrator's office, because we're able to convene a large group of people to come together. So just quickly to highlight, coming into the organization, I think like anybody else, the first thing that I really did was take a look at how we're organizationally set up to figure out whether we can actually carry out what people expect of us. And it really meant taking a hard look at what are the back end functions that we really need to be able to operate. Human resources, people don't talk about that very often, but if you don't have people to be able to recruit and retain our employees and to help us with training and all the other things that we need to run a good organization, we're going to be challenged. So we really spent some time figuring out how to build up our HR functions. And as you know, we have a very significant level of backlogs in terms of hiring and vacancies in the organization, citywide, not just our organization. We did a lot of work kind of thinking about how we could support our own organizational function. And the truth is, we're still working through improving that. You won't be able to change an organization in 1 year or even 2 years, but if you're consistent at it, over time, you'll have a better organization, a better run organization. And so that's our hope. So we do a lot of our we spend a lot of our time really trying to think about how do we run the best processes? Do we have the right protocols with regards to gift policies, employee retention, employee motivation, recognition programs, and so on. But more than that, some of our work in the last few years have really focused on how do we help the city return to our normal operations? I think as everybody knows, during COVID, everybody put down most of what their core responsibilities were to pitch in to help on the COVID-19 recovery and response. And I think as a result of that, many departments ended up having and developed a big backlog of work that they didn't do that they normally should have done. There was uncertainty for a long period of time around hiring and whether or not we would have funds to be able to hire people. So there was sort of a soft freeze on hiring for a bit of time during COVID because there was so much that was uncertain. And so as we came back from the pandemic, we had a lot to catch up on. And so my office, alongside with Ben Rosenfield, our controller, and Carol Eisen, our human resources director, their organizations are outside of the city administrator. We work together to really collaborate on how it is that we can make contracting better, easier, more transparent. How can we make hiring better, easier, more transparent, and also fix some of the financial systems associated with the city. These are 3 areas: hiring, contracting, and financial systems, that is everyone's pain point. Every single department, whether you're in the city administrator's office or not, have these big challenges. And so our perspective was, if we can move the needle on some of these core back-end functions of the city, it'll help us to run better as a whole. And so that work is still ongoing, and there's a lot to do there. So I will just say that we're continuing to make improvements in that world, but there's a long road ahead, because we didn't create the system that we had overnight. It's been years and decades of policies, legislation, administrative bureaucracy, and other things that we've put into place. So that's something just to know that we've been working on very much with the city. And I think some other pieces just to highlight for you. We're really proud that we were able to get the Office of Medical Examiner to be reaccredited. We lost our accreditation some time ago, and just this past year, we're able to get reaccreditation from the National Association of Medical Examiners. So we're really proud of that. We're focused very much on downtown recovery, and with regards to Moscone Convention Center and how it is we try to bring in and be proactive about trying to get business into the city. A lot of our shows, a lot of the conventions have canceled, and conventions used to represent about 1/3 of tourists and visitors to the city, and now it's significantly smaller. So it's just something that we are always cognizant of, how it is that we continue to bring people into the city's retail and downtown core to make sure that we continue to do that. And then finally, I'll say we're going to also be focusing on the Treasure Island development out there. It's been challenged, as I think many developments have been, because of the economics of being able to build. So that's something that we've been looking at with Treasure Island's leadership team there. And one of my big worries about, as we head into this upcoming budget year cycle, is that we are really set for another, we think, multi-year of budget shortfalls. And that's going to mean potentially cuts upon cuts. It will potentially mean mid-year cuts. We're not sure yet. And so it's going to be a big challenge for us as we move forward. And, I'm a big proponent of making sure we invest in and support the capital that we all have, the buildings, the roads that we have, to make sure they're in a state of good repair and good condition. But it's really challenged when we're in budget deficit years, and that will continue to be the challenge. We will continue to have those challenges heading into the next several years. So we'll see what kind of level of investment the city's policymakers are willing to put into that area. So I've touched upon quite a lot of topics, and I'm happy to answer questions that hopefully I can answer, and if I can try to point you in the right direction for those answers.
Right, thank you. We have a couple of pre-submitted questions to go to first. The first one is kind of a general question. To me, it's kind of a fun question. Of all the city departments that you administer, which have the most, no, I can't read my writing. Which are the most, the best to administer, to work with, and which are the most efficiently run? That gives you a lot of running room, as it were.
Well, it's sort of like if I answer that question, I'm definitely going to get myself in trouble. So I definitely can't, pick my favorites among all of the city departments here. But I will say this, which I really believe is true. You actually don't know which organizations are well run until you're in them. Because when you actually are in them, you see what kinds of policy or framework or resiliency those organizations have. And then you can really assess. So I would just say that the optics from the outside aren't always accurate to what you see on the inside. In my organization, when I jumped into the city administrator's office, I knew I had a huge portfolio. I knew from the outside about the kinds of projects they were involved in. I knew that there was, a central role that the city administrator played and could play to try to help set up the city organization. But, what you don't know from the outside is how resilient is your IT system? Do you have the ability to support remote work? Do you have strong policies in place to govern conflicts of interest or ethics? Do you have, what are those protocols for checking those things? So I just say that, you know, I can't answer that question. I will get myself in trouble if I did. But I think it's because you don't know until you actually get into an organization about whether they're well run or not, and whether they have the right safeguards in their organization and the right resiliency for the level of sensitivity of information they have in their work until you're in there. So I know it's a complicated question, but I'll say that I can imagine every single organization in our city, mine included, has a lot of work to do to try to be a better organization from many different angles. So I don't think that there is any perfect organization. I think we all have really big challenges ahead.
Right. Thank you. One of the challenges which comes from one of our Sunset neighbors is concerning let me find it here. The city cleaning up the PCE toxic fumes with soil vapors extraction at 2550 Irving. This is very site specific. The neighborhood wants remediation, not mitigation. The neighborhood wants a complete cleanup to protect all residents, not just the future tenants. What would be your comment about why the complete cleanup is not being done? Maybe that's a little off your expertise or control. I don't know.
Yeah, we don't have, our organization does not have any role to play in that piece. I know that there's the Permanent Appeals Board is about to hear, it sounds like a hearing on a formal appeal that was filed by neighbors, I think. And I think at that forum, it's important for folks to come out and voice their opinion. I know that this project has had a very long history where there's been challenges and a lot of community worries about, you know, everything from, you know, what will that project mean for the neighborhood? And I know the latest issue is around this potentially toxic substances found there. And the honest truth is, I don't personally, because we're not involved in it, what is being found or what the remedies are and what the considerations are. But I would definitely encourage people to find out, because I know that there's a difference between remediation versus what is the other word that is used? Using sort of a barrier essentially to kind of cover it up. And I would just try to understand, like, if you were to do like a full remediation, does that prevent future toxicity from coming? You know, if there's a contamination that's coming from, because what I understand is that it's coming from potentially a different source that they can't identify where it's coming from. So does it restart? Is there other issues associated with disturbing the soil? You're going to want to ask those kinds of questions. And I do think that it is the city's responsibility to take those expert opinions, those technical expert opinions into account. You know, it's our responsibility to take a look at that. So, you know, regardless of what the history of this project has been, if there's a legitimate health concern, those are things we should be addressing.
Right. Another question comes from a wider venue. There was a comment put in the Chronicle by an opinion writer saying that the West Side really is not a distinct, unique neighborhood. It's not really much of anything to be worried about, to be concerned about. And this person is saying, well, now we're going to be circulating petitions citywide, but particularly in the West Side. And isn't this like a call to action against our petition circulators to say, well, you people really don't matter in the Sunset and the West Side. Only the other parts of the city matter. Is that something we should be concerned about?
I mean, I think whenever people are not respectful of the neighbors, it's always a concern, right? I think being a Sunset resident myself, I take issue with the fact that people think that there's no character or that the community is not worth listening to. So I think that that's something that I hope that we don't, you know, foster that divisiveness in our city. You know, I don't want to see our city turn to that. So should it be concerning? If it becomes a concern where you're seeing that there are really aggressive behaviors online, or bullying, or threats, or actions that make people feel unsafe, I think it's really important to start involving law enforcement and to make sure that, you know, we are addressing those kind of security and real safety concerns, because we've seen in other places where the level of discourse and disagreement have led to actual physical violence and intimidation. And that's not, I think, ever a place that we as a city ever want to get to. So I think that's a challenge. I hope that that's not the case for these petition people or folks who are circulating petitions here, but I would really disagree. I do think we have a rich history in the Sunset. It's a community that has grown over time. It has transitioned with every phase of immigration that has happened too in our city, and we've seen the transition in neighborhoods as well. So I would disagree with that. I mean, and frankly, my whole family lives here, so so you know.
I thank you. Speaking as an Inner Sunset resident, I agree with you too. Okay, Glenn, over to you. Question, please. Glenn?
Forgive me, I'm back. I'm back.
Okay.
So I wanted to thank you so much, Carmen Chu, for being here. Really appreciate it. I wanted to ask you, how sure are you that radioactivity on Treasure Island is all removed?
Yeah, it's a conversation we continue to have with the Navy, but also with our state regulators on toxic levels. And so, you know, and any potential contaminants that might exist on the fact that we have a former Navy base. So I think for the areas that we have already done development, we feel very good about that, because those are areas that were not areas where there were the contaminating activities that were happening. And so those were really slated as the first stages or first phases of development that have happened. Aside from that first phase of development, there's quite a lot that hasn't moved at Treasure Island. And so I do know, in working with Bob Beck, who's my director over at Treasure Island, we're in constant conversations with the state regulators to talk through, you know, what are their levels of remediation that are necessary. We're constantly in conversations with the Army, or not the Army, the Navy, on the remediation work. There's probably going to be a delay in when they're able to remediate some portions of the island, and we won't develop until it's ready to go.
Okay, very good. Renee, you're next.
Hi, Renee.
Hi, Carmen. How are you?
Good.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
One of the groups that you mentioned about petitions is Sean and I, or CSFN Save Our Neighborhoods, petitioning against that building behind us.
Oh.
We're doing well.
By the way,
We're
I
giving
gotta say, well, I've got to say, like, I see that, and for someone who's been in the city and have seen like the planning processes play out in our city, I can't imagine the city ever approving something like that.
No.
You know, but anyway.
So I was really happy that the Board of Appeals, you know, sided with the zoning administrator 4-0, and it seems like they're going to continue to probably, if they keep pursuing something like this, they're going to be against that because it's out of the boat code. But anyway, that's not what I was going to ask you, but I'm good to see you. So you said that you're, and you just talked about Treasure Island and that it's under your purview. So I'm a little confused why Treasure Island and the development would be under your purview when you say DBI and some of the other planning departments and such are not, or other development isn't. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a great question. Frankly, like I said, I think with the city administrator, we have a whole hodgepodge of different functions. They don't neatly fit together necessarily, right? Like, how does animal care and control fit with the medical examiner, or, you know, how does that fit with the Moscone Convention Center or Treasure Island? There's no through line there, right? And I think the way that the organization has been formed over time is that as a legacy, it kind of came together because you had small organization that needed administrative back-end support, like HR services, accounting. And so they came together to receive those services so that we wouldn't duplicate them in all these different departments. The way that Treasure Island came to us, though, was part of the process when the redevelopment agency was dissolved through the state. And so we used to have a redevelopment agency. It used to be, and Treasure Island was kind of in that fold. There were a number of different projects that were completed in terms of being, having gone through the entire redevelopment process and so on. And they were in the process of of getting other development projects like TIDA or Treasure Island in it, but it's sort of the timing of when the dissolution happened that it was not one of those development projects that were part of the legacy wind down of the redevelopment agency. So when the city had to deal with dissolution at the time, it made a decision to try to put those different functions, including Treasure Island, within the city administrator's office. So again, because it had no other place to go really, they put it within the fold of the city administrator. And so there are certain things that came to the organization over time, like Treasure Island. It was such that we actually inherited a few other functions, but they ended up going back to the successor agency of redevelopment. Treasure Island wasn't one of them because it wasn't an eligible project that would have been eligible for OCII funding to wind down that project. So it landed in our organization. So there's no real rhyme or reason for it. It could have landed easily in another entity or been its own standalone entity, but it was during the course of the dissolution that the city at that time had said, let's put all assets that we are inheriting from redevelopment in the city administrator's office, and it has stayed there ever since.
Do you see, is it because of the size of the project that you inherited? And if so, do you see other projects, perhaps you inheriting them as well, or?
Well, I don't, right now, there are a good number of projects like the Bayview Hunters Point development and so on that still sits within OCII, which is the successor agency for redevelopment. So there's a good number of those projects that are still there, and they're going to wind down. Basically, they're going to continue to administer that program until it's done, basically. Treasure Island is in our shop. I think some of the issues is that as the city continues to utilize more IFD financing, basically one of the ways in which we're able to build a horizontal infrastructure before the vertical goes in, there's going to be more of a need to provide Treasure Island-like oversight. And so I imagine the city's going to have to address that sooner or later about where that should fit and where it should sit, whether it's in our organization or somewhere else. There probably is going to be an effort at some point to reorganize our structure so that there is oversight over all of these IFD developments over time. That's my guess.
Do you find that
Okay.
because, I mean, it said the toxic issues there and such like that.
Say that again. I'm sorry, Renee.
The toxic issues like that in the Bay Point and other places, because there's thousands of these 2550, the 2700 and many other places have these issues. So we need to have more constraints.
Cortese sites and that sort of thing, yeah. We have to move on now. Shauna?
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Renee.
Shauna, are you muted? Shauna, you're muted. Unmute yourself.
Okay,
Okay,
there we
we're
go.
gonna have to,
No, I'm muted.
Hi, Shauna. I can hear you. Oh, wait. Not now. Not now. Yep.
Go ahead.
I think you're on mute, Shauna.
I don't understand.
Now you're not. Now you're
Now
not.
you're not. I did it for you.
Oh, thank you. Okay. My son's not here, so I can't do anything. First of all, if you didn't hear me, thank you for your nice words about the sunset. I wanted to tell you what Rick Swig of the Board of Appeals said, and I quote, "There is no housing shortage in San Francisco. There's affordable housing shortage." So I'd like to know, if you can answer, maybe not, why are they pushing 82,000 units on the city where 700,000 people left? We have 61,000 vacant units. I forget how many, maybe, I can't honestly remember how many units are being built now that have already been built.
171.
That are in the, how many?
71,000.
71,000, okay. Already built, in the process of being built, and have approval from the planning department. You know the Westerly, you've seen it, okay? It's over half vacant in 6 years. So I'm trying to get a handle on why everybody thinks we need 82,000 units more.
okay, Shauna, you're breaking up.
Yeah, I can't tell you how that number was arrived, but I know folks who can, and it definitely is related to some of the state's RENA goals, the housing goals. I can't tell you more. I don't want to overspeak or to relay something that's not correct, but I think it has a lot to do with the state's goals for housing development that they assign to different counties. And so I think that's how they came up with it. There are many that you mentioned that are in the approved pipeline, for example.
Yes.
And you're right, there's a lot of approved ones already that is a matter of like when do they actually come online and when do they actually get built? Like Treasure Island is one of them, where
Yes,
there are
yes.
thousands of units that are slated to be built there that have approvals already to kind of go
Mhm.
forward, right?
Yes.
And that is counting towards that 82,000 goal. And then I think you mentioned yet another issue, which is that there are perhaps a number of units that are being held vacant because people don't want to rent into them, or for whatever reason, they're holding
Right.
those units open. And that's a whole other issue. So I couldn't tell you more, but I can help connect you to someone who can tell you about how we got to the 82,000.
Oh, I know how we got there.
Okay.
Okay, but what I'm
Right.
trying to say is it's not needed. I mean, all the development in Visitation Valley, et cetera. I mean, I have them all written down. I studied it and stuff.
Yeah,
And
Shauna, you're
that's all
preaching
I'm
to the
trying to
choir.
say.
Shauna, you're preaching to the choir.
Okay, yeah, no, I know, but I'm telling Carmen.
Okay.
Thank
Let me
you.
go on to another question.
Okay.
George Wooding.
Hey,
Go ahead,
George.
George.
Yeah, hi, Carmen. How are you?
Good, George. How are you?
Good, good. I often spend my Monday lunch listening to the Capital Planning Committee meeting with you and Brian just to stay abreast of what's going on. And I wanted to ask you real fast if you're going to, it seems like you're starting to increase using certificates of participation and getting a little bit away from general obligation bonds. That's my impression at the moment, primarily because residents may not give you the 2/3 vote on some of these GOBs.
Mhm.
And I just wanted to ask you your thoughts on that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that our level of investment as a city in capital is not where it should be. And we are, over the next 10 years, we're slated to have something like about $2 billion in capacity when we know that our need is far, far higher. And this is to even deal with, HVACs, roofs, like elevators in bad repair, our roadways, the sewer system. Like there's a ton of stuff that are a challenge. And you saw that with some of the immense flooding that we saw in the city, right? So, and that's only going to get more challenged, especially when we see more kind of big events, big storm events and other things that are happening. So I think as a whole, I think our level of capital investment, it has improved significantly from when I first started in the city in terms of the level of investment, but it's also dropped off pretty significantly during COVID. So we were doing this good ride where we were kind of heading up, we're incrementally growing our capital budget every year. During COVID, it got cut down to pretty significant levels, like where it was only $50 million. And the only way we were able to try to make it whole and continue to invest in like the street resurfacing that we know we've made progress in trying to improve the street conditions was by utilizing COP, certificate of participation capacity. Over in the past, I would say that GO bonds and certificates of participation were always, and the cash program were always like the three major buckets we would use to deal with capital. If you could, you would fund a lot of things with cash. There were certain things that you could go to voters and ask them to support that we would use the GO bond program for. And then there were just certain buildings or certain projects that had to be done. Let's just say we had to repair a jail facility that we just know the voters will not want to support, right? But it still needs to be done. And so in the past, the way that the capital program looked at these things were to say, let's utilize our COP capacity, which is higher debt levels, right? Like meaning that the interest rate is higher on a COP than it is on a GO bond, right? Because it's not secured by general property taxes. We'll use that when we have to on things that we know are necessary, but are not likely to get voter support for it. And let's preserve the things that we know we still need, but are more likely to have voter support through the GO bond program. So it was always meant to be a very complementary bucketing of funding to be able to deal with different issues. And we tried to use the cash program for things that were not the longer term things. Maybe it was like a roof repair or something small, right? In the last 2 years, because of the pandemic, because so much of the funding got cut on the cash program, COPs were used as a backstop to try to stem, the lack of investment. And part of that was to try to say, the more we kind of wait on some of these things, the worse off the building is going to get. If you don't fix that roof, more water intrusion is going to happen, and that building is going to be worse off shape than if we actually put the money in through the COP program. So some of the thinking is, as a stopgap measure, we would use the COP capacity. It's not our first choice to be able to put that in. And the hope was that as we recover from the pandemic, we would be able to grow back the cash program and restore it back to the level it is. That's not turned out to be the case because of where we are with our budget deficit right now. So I think this is why I worry very much about this level of investment, because I don't see us climbing back on that just yet. And we're going to basically grow our deferred maintenance as a city. And I think that's going to be the big question we're trying to answer here. And how are we going to address it? The other thing I got to say, relating to Shauna's point, is that, in the past, our capital program was reserved for facilities that the city owned. And over the last maybe 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I'm not sure, 4 years ago, affordable housing was introduced as a bucket of the capital plan. That was a new category. It was never there before. And as you know, there's a lot of political interest in funding affordable housing. And so we have spent about $1 billion in debt capacity on affordable housing over the last decade. So that's $1 billion that didn't go into our city-owned public infrastructure. So I think we have to contend with a worsening economic climate, historically trying to climb out of a very bad level of investment on capital. And then we are also very cognizant that we only have so much COP capacity. At some point we hit our debt obligation limits and other things that we can't surpass. Right. So I don't think that it's a trend that we want to continue in terms of continuing to rely so heavily on COPs. In the interim, it is what we are doing. And I would hope that we can return back to a higher level of capital investment from our cash program over time.
Right, thank you. Eileen Boken, you were the caller. I saw something from your phone. Are you wishing to ask a question, Eileen?
Well, yes. Well, Carmen, it's actually going back to
Hey, Eileen, I can't hear you. You're breaking up.
Okay.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, I've got it back, hopefully.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, the question has to do, Carmen, with really your capacity as a former District 4 supervisor. And this is kind of something Charles alluded to earlier. There was a Chronicle opinion piece with the headline, "Sunset Tower Isn't Out of Scale, SS Housing Crisis Is." And in that article, the person said, and I quote, something that I consider personally to be threatening. And I quote, "Let's talk about the aesthetics of the neighborhoods anti-housing activists are fighting to preserve. Most of the Sunset is, let's face it, full of unremarkable single-family homes, stuffed cheek to jowl in streets choked with parked cars. Neighborhood character, question mark. This neighborhood looks like it's been a character in a sitcom since 1975, and it is in need of a dramatic facelift, or maybe just a new cast." And to me, that final phrase I thought was very inappropriate. The problem is, I don't know if you're aware that pretty soon there is a statewide ballot initiative that's going to go out for signatures fairly soon, called Our Neighborhood Voices.
To this question.
Okay, well, that's why I'm asking why you're asking me again. But anyway, that was the whole thing about possibly petition gatherers being bullied or threatened. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mary Liza, and then
Yes,
Steve is the last one.
I just had another quick question about hiring. I understand that people are understaffed. So is that something that your department does within your department for your department, or do you have to go through the city process?
We are one department within the city structure, so we have to follow the same rules that applies to the rest of the city. I do have my own staff to be able to run kind of the recruitments and to do that. So I have my own HR team to do it. We have been cognizant of building a new HR team because we want to resource it the right way. So we have people who can continually be recruiting and out there on our behalf. The organization that has been really spearheading a lot of some of the improvements and streamlining on hiring is the Department of Human Resources. It's outside of my organization, but we have been collaborating together, Carol Eisen, myself, and Ben on government operations recovery. My organization is primarily focusing on what we can do better on contracting. DHR is focused on hiring, and then Ben's shop is working on the financial systems. And again, those are the three major pain points we hear repeated across departments about things that drives them crazy, that takes a lot of time. And we agree that if we're able to actually make some improvement in those areas, our organization as a whole could work better.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, last question, Steve.
Hey, Steve.
Steve, are you on? I think you're muted. Steve, unmute yourself.
Hi, Carmen.
Hey, Steve. I think about you often when it comes
that picture
to.
of us on the bocce ball court.
I was gonna say, I think about you often when I think about my poor bocce ball sportsmanship or skills.
You know, if you estimate that, say, there's 80,000 people in District 4, and you divided that by 10 neighborhoods, that's still 8,000 people per neighborhood. So it's like a small town, you know, each neighborhood. And each neighborhood has its own kind of character. And so, especially La Playa Village, we have a lot of issues here. And so my question to you is, would you be willing to participate in one of our Zoom meetings rather than, you know, sometime down the line?
Of course.
Okay, so I'm going to get Rachel, the head of our organization, to email you with an invitation.
Yeah, of course,
Okay,
Steve.
so I'm going to be short, but I just wanted to mention that while Mayor Lee was in office, at one of his budget meetings, I brought up some of the things where we could make more income for the city. And another thing that I'm very interested in is on the other end, which is how do we save money for the city. And just to give you one of the examples that I came up with is that I think that we could use the school facilities, the auditoriums and the football fields and so on and so forth to bring income into the city. For example, Washington High School has a great football field with a stadium there that kind of looks out over the bridge. You know, it'd be a great place to stage a concert or something of that nature. Plus the other facilities, a lot of our schools, like Lowell and so on and so forth, have these great auditoriums that could be leased to corporate, you know, corporate conventions and that kind of thing. So, you know, it just was one thing. He seemed to be very enthusiastic about that idea, and then he unfortunately passed away. And so that's one thing. So I have ideas about, and I have ideas on the other end too, about how to save the city money. So anytime you should, like, if you want to, I'd be willing to come down and visit with you and talk about some of these things, you know.
Sounds good, Steve. Maybe we'll grab a cup of coffee somewhere in the neighborhood.
That would be great.
Play bocce together.
Or play bocce together.
Well, see, that would be
popular.
That would be very embarrassing for me. I need some lessons.
No, it's not about that. It's about having fun. It's
I was
still very
saying
fun.
that it'd be extremely fun.
Right. Thank you, Steve. Thank you all for these questions. Carmen, thank you for visiting with us and speaking to us and answering our questions so thoroughly. We really
thank you so much. Thank you, Charles. Look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thanks, Carmen.
Thank
Right.
you. Take care, everybody.
You too. Okay, let's end the program. We will now go on to the business meeting and to